Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for turning up. I think that intro might be longer than my talk. So the good news is I normally have very few slides. I have more than usual, but 10 slides. That's all I have. And if we have time, we'll show you a couple of pictures from where I've been. It's a pleasure to do a talk locally. I was saying, Stephanie, this is the only week I'm actually in San Diego between January and mid-April. So I was very lucky I was able to have the conference. Thank you for organizing the conference the 1 week I'm here. I'm very grateful for that. I know many of you are in discovery, so this is a development topic. As I told Stephanie, I'm one of the people in development, you give us your pristine drugs and we'd ruin it by doing bad clinical trials, right? So I'm one of those people in development. And the topic today, for those of you who are even in discovery, is a little bit about how we're trying to improve how we develop drugs, right? And I'm sure unless you've been hiding under a rock, decentralized clinical trials are like the AI hype in clinical trials. So there's nothing hotter in clinical trials than decentralized clinical trials, basically because of COVID, right? So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what's going on there, what's happened, and a little bit about what the future might hold. So that's what the talk's about. Hopefully it'll be of some use to you. So what is a decentralized clinical trial? It's actually a term many people don't like, okay? And they're confused. The reason we use it, decided that's what we're going to use, right? That's simple as that. And the reason they did that is for a while, we called it virtual trials, but that has a very different meaning in early development. So the FDA one day said, this is what we're going to call it. So that's why it's not a particularly good term, but it is what everyone's using. And we need everyone to use the same term. So even if not everyone likes it, it's a good thing that we kind of use it. The other thing is it's an umbrella term. So many people go, well, we'll never have fully decentralized trials. That's not really the point. Pretty much 99% of the trials going forward will have a decentralized component to it. Right? It doesn't have to be everything is virtual. Now, DTRA, which Stephanie mentioned, I'm going to go into what it is, but one of our things was to start up with a glossary. You can't have a new area without people agreeing on terminology. So you can go on the DTRA.org. Don't put in DTRA.gov, that's the Defense Threat Agency, completely different thing. But DTRA.org, and you can for free see all our resources. And one of them is a glossary. If there's a term you don't understand in clinical trials, you can just go in there, just like decentralized clinical trials, and it'll tell you what it is. And it's basically trials that have certain technologies that allow patients to access research without having to necessarily go to a hospital or clinic, right? Which I think most people would agree is not a bad thing. Now, prior to COVID, there was a bit of people playing with decentralized trials, and there was lots of barriers. Why was it so hard for something to be taken up? Well, pretty much everything is hard to adopt in the pharma world, right? Nothing happens fast. But specifically for decentralized trials, we had regulatory ambiguity, so we weren't sure what the regulators around the world, will they accept these new methodologies? People weren't sure. There was definitely global variability in what was allowed, what wasn't. And if you're running a global trial, it's really not very easy to run it if different regions of the world have different ideas. We certainly needed technology interoperability and data flow. We also had to have both investigators and patients ready. Now, many investigators are very suspicious of kind of this whole thing because they think it's going to take their jobs away, basically, which it's not. But the worry was, well, if you don't use sites, but the idea is not to be siteless at all. It's actually many of these technologies that allow investigators to be more successful, recruit better, and actually they can do a lot of their remote assessments. So people are beginning to calm down a little bit, understanding that maybe this isn't a threat to them, but also for patients to understand. The other thing we need is endpoints that are actually appropriate for decentralized trials. And some you can do, some we have to develop and validate. So that was a limitation. And then one of the ones that people don't talk too much about, but very important, is really the culture within organizations. So again, pharma is not known for fast culture change, and you're used to doing things a certain way. So all of these as barriers that we had to overcome. So before COVID, it wasn't no secret that we had real problems recruiting patients. Most trials are late for their recruitments. So that was a problem. We weren't getting representative patients. And there was very obvious case to use more decentralized ways of getting patients, et cetera. However, industry was pretty slow adopting these. One of the common sayings is people don't see the light when they are enlightened. They only see it when they feel the pain. Okay, so pharma was kind of, yeah, I like to play with this, but, let's do a pilot. And then when COVID hit, all these vendors who'd been begging pharma to do pilots, literally their phone was ringing off the hook. And every customer was saying, that thing I've been ignoring you for about 6 years about, can we do that yesterday, please? So it was kind of a very tough time for the vendors at the beginning of COVID. During the beginning of COVID, trying to pivot trials, it will continue going. I remember one of my pharma friends talking to me earlier in the pandemic, and he said, well, we think this thing will blow over by October, so we're just going to sit back and come back in October. And I said, do you understand that your sites, your vendors may not be financially viable by October? So it was kind of interesting just watching how things develop. It turns out many people were able to pivot their trials and understood that really going forward, it's really not an option not to be resilient. So, COVID was now, tomorrow, who knows what's going to, we've had the Ukraine-Russia situation that's had a huge impact on recruitment for some studies. So there's always going to be issues that will impact trials. So using decentralized methodologies, no question, will help us be more resilient. So that's something that's no longer just something that's good to have. I think most organizations have realized they need to be more resilient about that. So basically, our mission is really to accelerate the adoption of these methodologies and to really enable patients to be able to access appropriate trials using decentralized. So many oncology patients, now oncology is an area where probably decentralized had the least impact so far. But think of all the oncology patients that can't make it to Sloan Kettering, or if they want to do, they've got to, have a lot of expense and inconvenience, and it's very hard if they're particularly ill to get to that center of excellence. So if we can do any of these things without the patient having to travel, it's clearly better for patients. So those are things that we would like to sort of empower. So very quickly, in 3 months, we put together over 125 members. It was an interesting experience. I talked to my pharma friends, and as predicted, there are 2 questions for me. Who else is in, and what's your 5-year plan? And my answer was terrible. I gave them a really bad answer. I said, I'm looking for leaders, not followers. If you need to know who else is in, then you're not right. And also, we don't know. We've asked you all at the same time. And our 5-year plan is we have no plan, because you're going to be in our leadership council. You tell us what's the plan should be. We're not God. So despite that terrible message, we managed in 3 months to get this together. Now, one thing I will mention, a certain unnamed large tech company was the last one to come in. And probably people running this group might appreciate this. And the guy, we sent him his invoice for his membership, and he wrote back to my executive director and said, thank you very much for the invoice, but we need an agreement. I have an army of lawyers to look at the agreement. And our executive director wrote back and said, no, there is no agreement. This is just a membership organization. There's no confidentiality. There's no data exchange. There is no need for an agreement. And I could tell we'd blown his mind. So he wrote back he goes, are you telling me you've onboarded this many companies without a single lawyer involved? And he mentioned a particular company that's known for their lawyer, and they're one of our members. He's like, even these guys, you're doing this without a single lawyer involved? And I asked my executive director to write back and say, that's how we did it in 2 months. So that's how you put together a larger organization quickly. The next step was to ask everyone who's in the leadership council, what is it that you actually want to achieve? And what was interesting is we had pharma, we had patient groups, we had FDA. You would worry that these people would have very different priorities. It turned out, quite honestly, it was surprisingly easy to do this. I was expecting a lot of fighting, but we came up with 4 priority areas and 12 initiatives. And there were definitions, best practices, education, and removing barriers. And under each of these, we have initiatives. But actually, in less than 2 years, most of these have delivered already. I won't bore you by reading them, but you can see basically it's things like, how do we have a common nomenclature? Let's have a glossary, let's have KPIs, let's change the norm. What about best practices? Let's have a best practices handbook, map the patient journey for each indication, technology and data strategy. What about a knowledge repository? So we're crowdsourcing evidence of impact. What does that mean? Most management in the company is saying, well, how do I know decentralized trials saving me money or making it faster? How do we do that? And no one really shares that data apart from what they have internally. So we, because we have all the members in our group, are really sharing that data and showing people what is the impact, right? And have a knowledge sharing playbook and also have a curricula that teaches people what is decentralized, if you want to get into it, what that might be. And globally, we're looking at having insight maps that tell you where are decentralized trials being conducted. We're talking to all the regulatory groups around the world and working on data connectivity. So that's kind of the initiatives in a nutshell, okay? This is like a 100-deck slide deck I put into one slide. We have over 300 individuals from these 125 companies volunteering to do this. And I'm sure all of you who are running anything with volunteers, it's a challenge because they're day jobs, but these are the people doing all the work. I'm just traveling the world, just doing nothing. And then the next thing I'll talk about is really, what is the state of adoption and implementation? So these pictures we started having an annual meeting straight away. And these are people from each of these pharma companies talking about what is happening in their company. And what I can tell you, this is just a survey we did, how much DCT is there in your company. What we do know is because there's a lot of worry that COVID is over now and pharma will go back to the old ways of doing things. What we know is they've really incorporated these methodologies into their thinking, into their strategy, into all their sort of SOPs. So we know that on a fundamental level, companies have realized for many, many reasons, these are good things to do. So we don't believe we're ever going to go back to being, pen and paper and be at the site only. We're definitely going forward. The question is, how fast will it be implemented? And the answer to that is like anything else. Before the pandemic, there was sort of playing experimentation. I didn't draw this graph. I actually think the mid-pandemic adoption was actually like this. I would say certain things right now. So definitely a huge uptake during the pandemic. Then we're currently in the post-pandemic hesitation phase, right? Do I need to go whole hog? And that's going to come down to a couple of things. One is there's few trials that were conducted during COVID, either have been submitted recently or going to be submitted. And once people see that maybe the FDA says, yeah, that's okay, then there'll be more confidence. There's no question about that. And there's a lot of other small things that will get people more comfortable. And eventually, this is really an ethical imperative for us to do this because it's much more patient-centric than what we're doing otherwise. So that's what's going to that's what's been happening in terms of adoption. We're currently in what I will call DCT 1.0. So, you could be in the clinic or the home. We have e-consent. You can do a video visit. You can possibly have home visits. A lot of companies with nurses that go into the home. Some limited monitoring remotely, taking labs locally, some supply chain stuff. DCT 2.0, you may have noticed all the press releases by CVS, Walgreens, Kroger's. I think even Dollar Tree, I heard the other day, is developing a health group to go. So pretty much every pharmacy is getting into the decentralized clinical trial business. It makes sense that they have a location near pretty much everyone in the country. So it makes Walmart, same thing. They're all getting into DCT. So for sure, there's other examples of that where the location doesn't have to be in your home. And what we're really striving for is flexibility for the patient. The ideal, which is very hard to get to operationally, is the patient could say, for visit 1, I want to come in and see the doctor. Can I do visits 2 or 3 remotely? And can I come back and see the doctor in visit 4? That's the ultimate flexibility we would like. Some patients don't want people coming to their home. They're happy to go to the local CVS. So we would love to have optionality for patients where possible. And I think that's where kind of going towards, including next gen sort of participant support and giving them that flexibility. Also, there's a lot of IT things that probably some people in this room are way better than me at, which is how do we do bring your own device? How do we do RWD, that kind of thing. So that's all to be developed. And we clearly need to improve our endpoint modernization, right? So all our endpoints, certainly in neuroscience, are not great. We had great imaging talk, but apart from imaging stuff, most of our endpoints are not great. We could do with not only modernizing them, but also, I think, not in development, maybe in commercialization. I was actually chairing a clubhouse just yesterday on wearables and stuff. There's many things that patients care about that are not in our outcome measures. And some of those could definitely be done remotely and could differentiate a drug, not based on things FDA wants to see, but things that patients and clinicians care about. So I think those are things we'll work on future of DCT. Believe it or not, that's the end of my talk. Any questions? And then if we have time before 11:20, I will show you a couple of pictures. Don't want to discourage any questions, but if anyone has questions, hopefully that was pretty straightforward. I see a lot of people nodding. Sounds like people are supportive of this, which is great. Looks like we have one question. Go ahead.
I must applaud your effort.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
For a long time, it has been known Asians react to drugs very differently from
absolutely.
the white. But the problem has been we are representing the Asian, not just Chinese, represent 6% of the populations in America. So you can't blame the American companies. They are all for profit driven. So they target the 50% non-Hispanic, non-Asian voters.
Yes.
And that's how they make money. But I really applaud your effort to bring all these globalized, decentralized clinical trials, because we really need to understand. We all know we are smaller than most white neanderthals. I have to call them, but do we use the same amount of drugs or not? What are the side effects? We all know we have different side effects.
Yes.
So this decentralized DTRA is really a great start. You have to start with research before you reach the clinical trial stage.
Yeah.
So I think you're doing a great job for Chinese.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
General.
So I'll say two things about that. I always love having, because I have 4 passports. I'm an Englishman with an American passport, an Australian passport. But when I came to America, I found it very fun. We also talk about in medicine, actually, like pharmacogenomics, Asians. I'm like, you do understand that Asians have some variability within Asians. So they sort of consider all Asians the same, which is kind of really funny. And then the other thing is I was on a panel with an FDA leader, and the questions were about what percentage of trial patients in the global trial should be from the US. And he kept about US patients, I said, so let me ask you a question. Do you mean white men patients? Because when you say US patients, is that Asian Americans? Is that Indian Americans? What do you mean by American patients? So we're not very sophisticated at all when it comes to that, especially in the US. For a country of immigrants, we're really not very sophisticated about that. I see a bunch of questions coming. So
Thank you for the wonderful talk. And as you mentioned, decentralized trials become the future trend. And thank you for all the efforts. And as you mentioned, there are some challenges like the regulatory ambiguity, the local variability, right? I'm wondering, can you share with us some of the progress in, maybe standardize some of the practice and where we are, and that will be very helpful. Thank you.
The quick comment about that, we have, I gave you a very short talk. There's a lot more work going on. So we have what's called a regulatory forum that's meeting with every regulator around the world. So actually some of our work is a meta collaboration. So we're actually helping Transcelerate understand this, because most of these organizations have some sort of DCT initiative that's for kind of narrow. So what we're doing is not replicating anything they're doing, actually using their inputs. So we're saying to these people, hey, did you know these other people were doing this? You should work together. So same with the regulators. So we're actually getting regulators together. Some have issued guidance, some haven't. So we're actually providing a lot of information. We've been talking to everyone, Japan, China, Europe, everyone. So that's what we're doing regarding that. And I'm giving you quick answers because I see we have a lot of questions now. Go ahead, and we'll come back up there.
I have a question about the decentralized clinical trials. So could you tell a little bit more on how you use the digital products to help with the decentralized clinical trial?
Use which products, sorry?
Digital products. like software. You also mentioned wearable devices. So I just wanted to know if
Oh,
you can
so digital,
expand.
I said digital trial, yeah.
Yeah.
So actually one of the terms people prefer to decentralize is digital trials. So I would say pretty much anything you can think of is of digitizing the clinical research. Pretty much everything digital is relevant. I can give you a much longer answer afterwards, but I don't think we have time, if that's okay. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I'm Jason Wang. Wonderful talk. I have two specific questions regarding data sharing. You know, again, you go across different countries. How are you
Yes.
going to use the centralized way to, I'm assuming there should be some cloud-based thing like data sharing. The second thing is about language, right? You talk so many countries and how can you use one language or maybe, you know, again, part of it is about standardization, I believe, right? You know, you talk about the regulations one way, different country has different regulations.
Yes.
You have been working on that. So more specifically, how you're going to operate to
Yes.
enforce or improve the data sharing
Sure.
and overcome the language. Thanks.
So thank you. Good question. Just like we have a regulatory forum, we have another group that's working specifically around that. So we have lots of subgroups that I didn't even mention. I just talked about initiatives. So that is actually a group of leaders who are experts in that from biopharma who are working on that.
Thank you so much.
And if anyone wants any information, all you have to do is go to DTRA.org, and maybe you work for, most of you probably work for an organization that's in DTRA. So, you know, so one, you can ask our secretary any questions. Secondly, because if you work, just name your random company, Pfizer, whatever. As long as you have a Pfizer email and you're a member, you can come to our annual meeting, you like help us. So, you know, anyone who's a member organization, anyone individual in their companies can get involved in DTRA. You could also become an individual member. So with that, I'm going to,
Question before you go on, maybe it's relevant to the audience here, is what are you doing in China? I didn't catch whether there are any Chinese companies are in part of your. So
when we started, we thought we'll have 50 members. We ended up with 125. We're actually, we have a global initiative. We have been talking, I used to go to China 4 times a year before the pandemic. So we're very much going to be, that's the next stage, is really trying to expand. So if anyone has any contacts in China, we have a lot ourselves, but we have regulatory contacts and, you know, others. But anyone wants to refer companies to us who are interested, I've actually, before the pandemic, I was actually helping friends in China develop there were a lot of initiatives going on in China about tertiary cities, secondary cities getting the same healthcare and research as primary cities. So I've already been involved with that prior to the pandemic, but absolutely, we haven't got there yet. So that's actually a growth area for us. And we do see Asia Pac as being a huge area, honestly, much more than Europe in terms of growth. So we see that. Can I show them the pictures before we come? I'm going to be very quick. So